Hello everybody and welcome back to part 2 in my mini-series on creeping. In the last episode, I showed you how to creep a troll. In this episode, I'll be showing you how to creep everything else. But before I do that, I would like to give a special mention to, without a doubt, the most common technique in creeping a troll in Edain. And that is to use your 2 starter units and your scout hero to creep the troll. So it is very fast and it is very effective. And in team games, you'll almost never see anything else. And that is because of the timing of team games and how team games differ to 1v1s. So as you see, these 2 starter units, I've used them to capture these 3 outside farms. And by the time I've done that, my scout hero is already produced. So there's no real delay in waiting for my scout hero to come out. And let's just have a look at how effective this strategy is. So the troll has targeted my scout hero now. I simply pull my scout hero through my units and pull it outside of the radius of the troll. When the troll starts to run back, it's going to run through my units again. And because I've got 2 swordsmen instead of 1, it's dealing double damage. And so the troll dies that quickly. And as we see, the scout hero suffers no damage and the starter units suffer almost no damage. So it is a very effective technique, and you can see why it is the most common technique used in Edain to creep a troll. The difference between this tactic being used so much in a team game and some different variation being used in a 1v1 is because, as we see, in a team game situation, there's not really that much advantage of doing anything else other than creeping the troll like that. Because you know that your enemy over here has got his own troll to be creeping. So it's not like rushing the troll is stealing his troll. It's just going to make getting your troll that slight little bit faster, which is going to make almost no difference. And as well as that, there's no wildman that you can be creeping in the meantime very often on team game maps. So there's no real advantage to be creeping the troll over here with 1 battalion and your scout hero, and then to be creeping elsewhere with your other battalion. And it's also the case for harassing. Harassing is not such a big deal in a team game, especially on these closed these very narrow maps like this, because you're not going to be able to come around and flank and catch your enemy by surprise. You're going to have to go through his front line to actually start to harass him. So really that is why creeping trolls in team games has almost no variation, because it is, without a doubt, the most effective, the quickest, and the easiest way to creep a troll. So now I'll show you all the different ways to creep everything else. Wildmen, they're part of everything else. So here I'll show you how to effectively creep wildmen. And in this situation, I'm using the Isengard Scouts, because these guys are going to be representative of not so strong starter battalions. If I was using Gondor, I could quite easily use 1 battalion of Gondor soldiers, and they can, with very little micromanagement, deal with an entire pit of wildmen. However, with these weaker units like the Isengard Scouts, the Rohan Peasants, or Mordor Orcs, they can actually struggle 1 battalion versus 1 wildman pit. So one way to deal with this situation is to use 2 battalions instead. And here I'll show you this. So it's very little micromanagement involved. All I'm going to do is bring them over to the wildmen. I'll actually put them on battle stance, and all I do now is press the A button and right click. So that gives an attack order. So now they're just going to attack everything in their way, and we'll do it behind these axe throwers just to make doubly sure. So it means that now they're going to attack everything until they reach this point over here. So as you see, some of my guys are attacking the pit and some of them are dealing with these wildmen. So really there, I didn't even need to be touching the keyboard and mouse. And these guys are just doing everything for me. And it's extremely easy, and you're guaranteed not to lose a battalion. The only thing you do have to watch out for is to attack the rubble once it gets destroyed. And you also have to be very careful. If you might have noticed then, this battalion started to run in this direction and it got close to these dangerous wargs. Now I will be showing you how to creep wargs a little bit later, and let's just say that they're OP AF in Edain. So there we go, very easy and very effective. But have a look here, none of these battalions have leveled up. So I'll show you another example of how to creep with these weaker units. In this example, instead of using 2 battalions to creep 1 wildman pit, I'm going to be using 1 battalion to creep 1 wildman pit. But I'm going to be doing it at the same time. So I'm going to be splitting my units and creeping 2 wildman pits simultaneously. So let's have a look at how that goes. So we'll send these guys over here and these guys over here. And actually, let's not forget to put them on battle stance, because battle stance actually is the better stance because it gives you the best ratio of damage to armor. So here we go. We're just going to do attack orders. And we're just going to make sure here that they're killing the units. Now, as we see, already I'm losing a few units in these battalions. And basically what you have to do, and you have to do this at the same time, so it requires a lot more micromanagement. You have to ensure that your units are not actually attacking the wildman hut, and instead you kill all of the wildmen before you attack the wildman hut. So in that way they're not suffering any damage. Now when there's no wildmen around, you can go ahead and switch them back to aggressive. But as we see, they're not inflicting that much damage to the wildman pit, both these guys. And as we see here, some more wildmen will start to come out. So what you have to do is you have to pull them back away from the wildman pit and do another attack order to tell them to kill the wildman first. Now this might seem a little bit too complicated and a little bit over the top, but actually if you don't do this, there is a risk of losing your entire battalion. And if you split your units in this way to attack 2 creeps at the same time, you have the opportunity of losing both your starter battalions, and that is pretty much GG if you're playing against a very good player. So after the second wave of wildmen come out, as we see here, you are capable of destroying the wildman pit, even though you've split. So it's taken a little bit more time, but actually, because we've split and we've done 2 at the same time, it's not that much of a time difference. And actually, as we see here, unlike the last time, this unit has leveled up to level 2. And also, let's have a look over here. This unit has also leveled up to level 2, because each unit has been killing more wildmen individually, because each unit has killed 2 waves of wildmen. Now, what's so important about getting to level 2? Well, very often with these very weak units, getting to level 2 is super strong. It's the case with Isengard scouts, because at level 2 they get this toggle weapon, so that now they can use their bows. And with Rohan, once they get to level 2, they get the draft ability. And that means that they get a sword and a shield rather than a hammer and sickle. So the boost to the effectiveness of your weaker starter units is very often extremely good with these weak units. And now look at this. Now that my Isengard scouts have got these bows and arrows, they can super easy creep a troll. Now you simply do the same thing as any troll creep, and you move in, switch back to the swords, and then you start to creep the troll. So there you see, by splitting my units, as long as my micromanagement was good, I very quickly got rid of 2 wildman pit, got 2 level 2 scouts, I then creeped the troll very easily and got even more experience for this unit. It's on level 4 because it killed the troll. And I've got these archers and swords in the same battalions. Now if you were using Isengard and you were getting wargs out, that is extremely effective because you can use these starter battalions to shoot your enemy pikes and trample the rest with wargs. So there you see the effectiveness of splitting when you're creeping wildmen. Now these 2 examples are exactly the same as if you were going to creep some goblins, or on some maps sometimes they're orcs. It's exactly the same thing. You're going to have a few swordsmen, whether it's goblins or orcs or wildmen, and you're going to have a few ranged units. With wildmen it's axe throwers, with orcs and goblins it's archers, but the same rules apply. So we saw how in certain situations it's so important to kill the units around the creep before you actually destroy the building. However, in other situations, it's actually more effective to ignore the creep altogether and actually just go straight for the building. And here is the perfect example of that, where I've got some reasonably tanky starter units in the Gondor soldiers, and I've got some pretty rubbish creeps in the spiders. So here we see I'm going to clump around the spider pit, and let's have a look at these soldiers. A lot of the health bars are on top of each other, but as we see, almost no damage is being dealt from these spiders. However, the spiders are extremely tanky, so it does take a little bit of time to kill them. So it's actually a lot better to just disregard the spiders and get the money first, because in that way, you've got the money then to invest in whatever you want, whether it be resource buildings, more units, or even potentially some heroes if you've got enough money. Now, you can also exploit the little feature of creeps in that they are controlled by the stupid AI, with the scout hero, just as you would with the trolls. So here's an example of Pippin drawing out all of the spiders here, and then you can bring in a unit of soldiers to actually attack the pit in that way. Exactly as we saw in the last example that I used in my previous video about the trolls. So it's like we're keeping the spiders alive here. And in this way, even if you've just got one battalion, they're not gonna have any damage inflicted upon them because all the spiders are chasing Pippin. Now this can be done with other types of creeps as well. But sometimes it's a little bit harder, especially if the creeps do a lot more damage than these spiders do. Because obviously, if your scout hero is slower than the creeps, as Pippin is slower than the spiders, he does actually suffer quite a bit of damage. So if they dealt more damage, then he could be at risk of dying. However, thanks to these spiders being pretty weak, it's not really the case. Wargs in Edain are extremely powerful, and unlike vanilla, there is no faction in which you'd want to charge one battalion of swords into a warg layer, because in the vast majority of cases, it will die. However, that's not to say that it's impossible to creep wargs with just swords. And here is an example, and this is probably a bit of an unfair example, because Gondor are one of the best starter units, but actually it just shows you that it is possible. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put them in defensive mode, and I'm also going to put them in shield wall, and what that effectively does is allows my units to survive one attack from the warg. If they weren't in defensive mode, and they weren't in shield wall formation, they would actually die from one hit from the warg. They would also die from one trample from the warg, as you may have seen just then, because I did it a little bit late. But they can actually reasonably well tank the damage from the wargs in this way. So you can actually kill the warg without suffering too much damage. Now imagine if this was one of the weaker units, like a Rohan Peasant or an Isengard Scout. Really, you'd have no opportunity to creep the wargs in this way. They would just completely and utterly die. And as we see, it's still a little bit slow. So out comes the second warg already, and that is quite worrying for me. So I'm going to have to kill it again. And already it's suffering quite a lot of damage to my troops, and I'm losing a lot. So it seems to me, actually, I did this pretty badly. And although it is possible, as you see, this tiny little mistake of actually killing one warg and then killing the other one too slowly has allowed the second to come out, or rather the third to come out that quickly. Now I'm going to have to attack again. Now the fourth one is going to come out. So already it's like a little bit of a comedy of errors here, where it starts to spiral out of control. Really, you have to do it absolutely perfectly, otherwise it does really spiral out of control, and you have the opportunity of losing two packs, and two battalions of swords, and already a lot of the units are dead. So it's going to cause me even less damage. And look at this, the building's already starting to repair. So terrible, terrible news for me here already. So I'm still desperately trying to do some damage to it. And out comes the warg again, and oh no, I just haven't got enough time to do it. So I promise you it is possible, but really this is probably the better example, that even though this is the best, or one of the best units to creep a troll, one of the best sword units to creep a one of the best sword units to creep a warg, in the Gondor units, you still see that they die if you don't do it absolutely perfectly. And there is the rebuilding of the warg pit. So that is an example of how powerful wargs can be. Now let's hopefully do a little better over here on this side of the map with these pikes. So if you didn't know, pikes are actually the counter to wargs. So we're going to try and be a little bit careful again and just get one warg out and focus the attention of just one, then pull back a little bit. So here we are, here's this one warg, and we're going to kill it in enough time before the second one comes over. And there we go, here's the second one, and enough damage is being dealt. So you see there that actually they suffer less damage from the wargs, and they also inflict a lot more damage. So that is why they are the counters to wargs. And here we go, we can attack the building, and as we see, we've lost hardly anything from this battalion. So more units are actually going to be attacking this warg pit. And as we also saw, the time in between killing the first warg and the second warg was a lot shorter. So it's going to take a lot more time for one warg to appear out of this warg den again. So hopefully here we'll see that with the use of pikes, and even just one single battalion of pikes, it's going to be enough to kill the warg pit without too much trouble. Now one warg does come out here, but it's not too much of a deal, and actually two come out. So once again, it's not perfect creeping by me, but because the pikes are counters to wargs, it's going to be reasonably easy for me to kill these wargs with this one battalion of pikes. So there you see, that is the perfect example of why, even when you make mistakes, and I made mistakes with the sword battalions, and it lost me the two battalions, I also made mistakes with the pike battalion, but because they are the counter, it wasn't a huge deal, and I managed to creep them in that way. So really I would say to you, just forget about using swords alone to creep wargs. Really you should just use pikes to creep wargs. Yes, you can use pikes and swords to creep wargs, just so that the swords can do that little bit of extra damage, so that you ensure that the third and fourth wargs aren't going to come out. But really, I would say just use pikes. Now, let's have a look here at how heroes do against wargs. So we've got this hero here, Beragond, who's a mid-tier hero. And actually, because he's a hero, I'm just going to kind of say to myself, I'm going to assume that he's going to do reasonably well against 2 wargs. So I'm not going to be as careful as I was with the other 2 examples in trying to bring 1 warg out at a time. But as we see here, already Beragond is down to half health. And really that shows the power of the wargs. But despite all that, he has managed to kill them. Now I'm going to tell him to attack the warg pit. But we see here, the damage that he does to the warg pit is extremely low. So you can almost guarantee what's going to happen here is that the third and the fourth warg is going to come out and start to attack Beragond again. Now, because 2 wargs got him down to half health, you can imagine the third and fourth warg could actually have big chances to kill him here. And losing a hero in this way would be devastating. It would almost guarantee you to lose the game against a very good player. So once again, this is just another example of how powerful the wargs can be in Edain. Now I'm just going to take the opportunity to kill this warg den first so that the 5th and 6th wargs don't come out. But is that too late? That one hit of that warg against Beragond there has actually put him in serious trouble. Now against this warg, he's even worse trouble, and there he goes down. So there is an example where in vanilla that would never be the case. You'd be able to very, very easily kill a warg pit with just 1 hero. In Edain, sometimes you can lose it, and that can lose you the game. The one exception to the rule of not using swords against wargs are Imladris. And if you watch any of my Imladris games, you see that in every 1v1 match I exploit this feature of Imladris, in that I can use my starter unit to creep wargs and therefore gain an advantage over my enemy, who, if they're a different faction, can't do that with their starter battalions. So here we see how I do it. I target one of the wargs as always, and I actually use this stand fast ability here to increase my armor. Now as you see, unlike with Gondor, on the battle stance, the Imladris units can tank a trample from the warg, and they can also tank attacks from the wargs. So what you do is you kill one, then you move over to the second, and you attack again. It's always important to get all of your units attacking at the same time. Now here you see, actually, one of my units died. However, the thing about Imladris is the heal is so important, because with any faction, the heal replaces 1 dead man per battalion. But because Imladris have got so few units in their battalion, replacing 1 dead man is 1/5 of their battalion being replaced. So that's 1/5 increased damage. And therefore, you're much more likely to keep the unit alive. And as we see here, I've creeped the troll, and with the thanks to the heal, I've actually suffered no damage, and I've lost no units as well. As well as that, I've gained some experience. And you can actually just go ahead and move over and start to creep other stuff. Like here we see me creeping the Wildman. So really, that is a power of Imladris that you should be exploiting in your games. If you're playing against anyone else who isn't Imladris, then that is a huge, huge feature of Imladris that you can really use to gain an advantage. Although wargs are extremely powerful in Edain, there of course is a limit. Say for example, you sent 6 battalions instead of 2 of swordsmen to the wargs. Even if they were relatively weak like peasants, they would still stand a good chance of killing those wargs and getting the creep. It's definitely not the most effective, but it is a possibility, and this feature is very often seen when you're in the mid to late game and there's still creeps that haven't been creeped, and you've got a big army. You can simply tell it to attack and they can deal with it with hardly any micromanagement. However, that's not the case for the most dreaded creep of all, the Fire Drakes. Ever since vanilla, these guys have been super strong. And as we see here, even though I've got 6 battalions of soldiers, I'm going to go ahead and tell them to attack. And let's just see what happens here. Well, you can only really describe that as RIP. And that's it. Just complete devastation. If they were wargs, I would have killed them. But the anti-infantry potential of these drakes is incredible. Absolute decimation. So if pure numbers doesn't work, what else can work? One of the ways that you can do it is if you're lucky enough to be playing a faction who has a ranged hero. As we see here, Gildor is a ranged hero. and I've switched up to Imladris, but there's no real reason for that, because many of these things are applicable to every other faction. It's just that Gildor is a nice cheap ranged hero who does a reasonable amount of damage. So here we see he's attacking this Drake and it's very close to being dead. Now, just before it dies, what I'm going to do is actually switch targets and start to attack this Drake over here, so that both can be on red health. And in that way, both are very close to being killed. And you do have to watch out for something, in that Drakes are unique in that they heal at level 1. So you have to keep switching up and making sure that this Drake that you've hurt earlier doesn't start to heal again. So there's a lot of micromanagement involved in this kind of tactic, although it does work. And the advantage of this tactic is because a lot of factions get starter units with ranged abilities. Don't forget that the hobbits have the ranged ability of rock throw as well. It means that very early on in the game you can actually creep these Drakes. So we'll bring our unit over here. Now they're Imladris units, which are very good, but they can be used, any units of any faction can be used. And what's more important, the starter units can be used. You don't have to have pikes or any other special unit. So here we see, once again, this guy's healed up a little bit more than I'd like, so I'm going to kill this one a little bit more. And you just have to make sure that, and there goes one of them, so now he's going to attack and kill this one, and once they're both dead, you can bring your units in, no matter what units they are, attack the building, and creep it in that way, and the respawn time on these Drakes is quite low. Another way to effectively creep these Drakes is to use a hero, and here we've got Arwen as a mid-tier hero around the 1000 mark, and we can see that actually she can tank the fire breath reasonably well. I mean, it's still quite a lot of damage, as we see there, but it's not as much as the infantry. So in that way, heroes are extremely good against Drakes. And let's have a look at her experience as well when she kills one. I mean, Arwen gets a crazy amount of experience anyway, but 3 levels from one Drake, even for Arwen, that is a lot of experience. So that is a reason why a lot of people actually don't kill the Drakes, and instead they just farm them. So they use their heroes to keep killing the Drakes until they level up to level 10 and they unlock all their abilities in that way. Now here we see that she's actually suffering quite a bit of damage. Now I could go ahead and use a heal, but let's say that I've actually wasted my heal on something else. So actually I can't use it, but I still want to creep this Drake. Well, what you can do is you can exploit the radius again as if it was a troll, as we saw in the first video. So here we see, actually I'm not quite out of the radius. And another thing is, look at this fire breath here. It's an AoE attack. And if you actually manage to get outside of the area, it completely misses you. So that's exploiting a feature of the fire drakes alone. Now here we see it's outside of the radius and I can get some flank damage in. And there we go, it goes down. And let's have a look at her experience again. All the way up to nearly level 6, and that's a huge amount of experience for Arwen very early on in the game. She also unlocks a heal for herself at level 2, which is very nice. So there we go, there it's down, and she can either destroy it herself, because once again the spawn time of the Drakes is very low, or you could even bring in a battalion of soldiers and do it in this way. Once again, I'm using Imladris, but there's no real reason for it. Any mid-ranged hero can deal with a Drake very effectively in this way, as long as you're very careful not to lose it. So that was an example of using a feature that we saw in the troll creeping video. The radius of the creep around the creep pit. And we can actually use the same idea that we used in the last video for the trolls for the Drakes. And some of you might know what I'm talking about already. It's keeping the Drake alive and then killing the pit, so that you can recruit the Drakes to your army just as we recruited the trolls to the army. So here we've got Arwen again, and this requires much more micromanagement than it does in the case of the trolls. So here we see again, Arwen suffered quite a bit of damage, but what we're going to do is we're going to try and get these Drakes over here outside of the range. Outside of the radius. So here they're breathing fire, which actually isn't that big of a deal, because I actually want them to kind of stay around here and not go back to their lair just yet. It looks like this guy is returning now, but my Imladris troops over here, and once again this can be used with any troop, it's not just Imladris, they've managed to kill the lair, and they've got these two Drakes still alive. So now what we can do is, because the radius has been destroyed and these Drakes are still alive, and they're following my units, I can bring them over to my enemy. Now you can either bring them over to your enemy's buildings, but like we saw earlier, the anti-infantry potential of these drakes is so huge that actually what might be better with these drakes is you can bring them over to your enemy's army. And who expects 2 drakes in Edain, when drakes don't even exist in the factions, to come over and start attacking their troops? Really, this can be devastating if your enemy isn't prepared for it, and really, who is going to be prepared for this type of tactic? So I hope you enjoyed this video. It's another nice example of using creeps in a more imaginative way. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.